Hey everybody, Professor Steins here, and this video is going to go over Lab 4 in the course of iTech 2410 Web Apps Programming. So in this lab, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of start talking about what does it take to start putting data into the server. In previous labs, we kind of dealt with the client and how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript kind of work inside the browser. But now that we're over here in the server land where we can kind of save and do other things with data. So last week's lab, we did a little bit with JSON and using PHP to print out some data. This week, we're going to try to get some data put into our application. So we're going to send it from the client back to the server. And we're going to do that through HTML form tags, text boxes, and drop-down lists. And there's a lot more to HTML forms than what we'll cover here, but this should give you a pretty good idea of what it takes to kind of send data back and forth. So anyway, once you kind of get into the lab and download the assignment, what you'll end up finding is the zip file, of course, and I've got a little bit of code there for you already to get started, so you can use it if you like. If you don't, that's fine. The important part about it is this data.txt file, and that's going to probably be the most important one. So it just kind of starts off as what it is. It's kind of what's called a CSV file, comma separated values. Instead of separating by commas, though, I'm separating by, this is called the pipe character. This is right shift right underneath your backspace key, the backslash key. That's called the pipe character. So I'm using the pipe character to kind of split out some different fields of the data. It's a little similar to what we did last week with JSON. JSON's a little bit more official and easier to use, but this will be a pretty good format to help us get started in putting data in. So most of the site is kind of already set up for you a little bit. So in the index top and bottom pages, or really you could kind of just open up all these files at once and kind of see. Right now the style sheet is blank, but it's there for you, and the JavaScript file is blank, but it's there for you. The add item PHP file is blank, but we'll get to that in the video here and how to deal with that. The top and the bottom pages just have the basic layout to kind of get things started for you. So I'd go ahead and just stick your name in it somewhere and add your W3 or CSS or Bootstrap CSS, whichever framework that you want to use. Go ahead and add that in here as well. But index.php is already kind of configured to throw some sort of thing out to the title that will be printed in the top page here. And then it's kind of H1 printed here too. So just go ahead and kind of update it a little bit, add to it or expand to it as you need to, but the idea is that we're going to kind of start by reading out our file here, and then that way we can start figuring out how we can send data to add to it. So eventually we're going to want to add more rows of data and be able to kind of start messing with our data. And that's kind of the point for this lab. So that means in index.php, we can kind of start here once we are pretty happy with what we're at. Make sure that your XAMPP is up and running and going. And actually what I should have done is I should have closed all these things and moved this folder to my, this one with all my files is the htdocs folder. So on the control panel here, you can just hit Explorer with Apache running, and it'll drop you right into htdocs. That's the folder that we're going to need, and then we can kind of just drag that folder from here to there. So your name lab 4, I'm going to put it inside htdocs and just kind of change my name here so it reflects me, Steins. And then we'll want to make sure to call that out through localhost. So if you can get to the dashboard, you should be able to get to Steins-lab4 as well. And again, not much there to get started, but just enough to kind of get things off the ground. And I would encourage you to kind of to build it up a little bit. Our focus is on the PHP though, so now that we do have it in the right place and we know we're with the right files, let's open all those back up again in Notepad++ and close the ones that aren't relevant. That way we know we are in the right location. We don't really need bottom and top at this point, just really index.php in our data file. So once we get to here, we know we're in the htdocs folder. We got it in the right location. We got our URL figured out, and we got it all pulled up. We should be pretty good. So inside a PHP block, we can sort of start the same way we did last week. Last week we talked about the file get contents function and how we can use that to pull in data to a variable. So we'll do kind of the same thing here. We'll define a variable text and use file.getContents to retrieve the data that is in the data.txt file. That way we have it available to us. If we throw that out for a print, just to make sure we're on the right track, print our text is going to print that out to the web browser for us, and we'll kind of see there's all of our data. It's all jumbled together, but it's there. It's doing its job. So after we get the data there, we need to kind of split that data up. So we can call that a variable lines, or whatever you want to call it. And the Php Explode function is pretty neat. What it does is it takes a character that you want to split by. You want to split a string or kind of explode a string into smaller pieces of a string. That's kind of the explode, or taking a big string and chopping it up. So we're exploding it on the new line character, and that's a /n. And the file we want to split is the text file. So we can do that there. If we do a print R after that, this time on lines instead of text, what we're going to end up seeing in the console here is an array, kind of similar to last week. We had an array of data. So now we have an array where each row in that array is one of the things. So Mom's Friendly Robot Oil is the first row, and then Bachelor Chow was the second row. And then that was the third row. Kind of a zero-based index, so you start at 0 and count up. So that does pretty well for us. So let's see, I got some extra windows here that I don't need anymore, so I'll close that one. Back to our code. Let's move that over here, make our browser a little smaller, that way we can kind of see them side by side a little bit better. So print R on lines will get us the array kind of printed out like that. So once we have an array, we can go through and try to do something for each of those. So for each loop is going to allow us to go through the lines that are there. And we'll just call that a variable I for each one as we go through the list. So lines is the list and I is each particular one. And we could probably see this a little clearer if we did a print underscore R of $i to print that, and then let's throw in a horizontal rule afterward. That way it's a little easier to see. So we should see kind of now everything is split up on one line. We got Mom Friendly Robot Oil. They're kind of each on their own line with a horizontal rule in between, which is cool. We want to further split that down though one more time to each of those fields themselves. So fields or row or columns or whatever you want to call it. Fields is going to be the split here. We're going to explode again. Split and explode. Pretty common, similar terms in other languages. So this time we want to explode on our pipe character. We want to split that line on that. And we want to split the one that we're looking at right now, which is I. And that'll give us fields. So if we do a print underscore R of fields, and we'll add a horizontal rule in between. That way they're kind of split. Right now it's just one line of text, but after this additional split onto fields, we're now going to have an array in each one where the field of that is now split into different values. And we're going to use this number here to do an index of what we to the value that's there. Now the way I kind of have the data file set up is that we have the product, and then we have a category that it belongs to. So there's kind of two hardwares. There's two beauties and two food things, or three food things. The next value here, this is the cost, or the price. How much is it going to cost? And then the last value is how many of them that we want to buy. So Mom's Friendly Robot Oil is going to be in the hardware section. We're going to pay $5 for it, and we need 5 of them because they're $5 each. And we'll do a little bit of math here to kind of help print that out. Let's start though by going back to actually printing it out so that we can see, we can kind of get an idea of what's going on here, but we'd probably want to print this a little bit more, more better. Yeah, we want to print this a little more better. That way we can read this data a bit. So we can use an echo statement to add some more printout to the page. We can start a table tag before the for loop and then close a table tag after the for loop, like so. Now that we have fields, we can build up the table row tag for each of those. And I'm going to kind of start this once and copy it, paste it a couple times. Or, that was not quite, I didn't do that quite right, did I? TD. Yeah, we need to copy that one a couple times, but we still need to, let's take some of these out. So we explode the string. Now we need to open a table row tag. And then we want to have a cell of data in the table for each one, and then maybe 1 or 2 more. We'll do some counting here. And then we'll echo out the closing TR tag. And then in between here, we'll want to add our fields variable at a offset to that variable. So the square brackets, we're kind of in an array here. So the square brackets is going to be a lookup into that array. So if we want to print the product that we're trying to buy, that's at position 0. So that's going to be 0. And I probably could have wrote this out a little bit better the first time. This one's going to be at position 1. And this one's going to be at position 2. And this one's going to be at position 3. There's 4 fields. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we got 2 additional ones. Probably just need 1, but fields with an S. Part of debugging is making mistakes. Undefined variable field didn't exist because it had an S. There we go. So now we're kind of more into a table view layout, and it's a little bit easier to read. We could add a column up here or a TH row to start give it a little bit better idea of what they are in there. Before we used a little bit of indentation, like we could use the $ inside of a quotation mark, but if we wanted to use a $ here for the price, kind of help show that it's the price, we'll need to use an escape character, and that's the /$, because sometimes weird things will happen if you try to use a $ inside of a double quoted string in PHP. So that'll help us show that it's the price. That's going to be the quantity. And then the last one here, this one's going to also be for sort of a total for that row, so we'll add the $. We're going to create a variable called total that we're going to stick in between here to do the math for us. So if they're $5 each and we're buying 5 of them, that's going to be $25. And that's going to come from kind of multiplying these 2 fields together. So I've already put it in the output string, but we need to actually create it. Now if we were first starting this, what we might try to do is straight up multiply these 2 together, field sub 2 with a multiplication symbol, the star, $field sub 3, if we were going to try to do our total, we don't need this last one here. And what we'll end up finding is there's a bunch of errors here. What's up with this? But then if you look at it, it's like, well, it did the math for us. It's actually right. It's 5,525, and looks like they're all correct. Yeah, the math all went right here. Well, the problem that we have here is that there are still some PHP data types that exist underneath when we start talking about like what does a data actually represent. So it kind of started as a string, and a lot of different languages work different ways, but it actually tried to do an automatic convert into a float value when we converted it. And it might not be very obvious when you look at the structure here, and kind of looking at data types, or what we're kind of making as a float, especially the one that had the period in it. See, this one has a period in it. Technically, it's a float. Most of these other ones are probably being interpreted as integers, and those little minute differences matter when you get really down into it. Anyway, to kind of go over that real fast, what we need to do to kind of get away from those errors there is that we probably need to actually convert that string to a actual float value, like an actual float data type. So it'll kind of take some sort of mixed character and return it as a float. We got two fields that we're doing that with here, and then technically they're both kind of being strings interpreted into integers, so we need to call that function twice, float val, for the first function, and then call it for the second function as 2, float val. So we're going to actually convert that string data type into a numeric data type, and then we can actually do the multiplication on that, because this is being evaluated first, and then this is being evaluated, and then the two are multiplied together. Order of operations typically works pretty well in most programming languages. So anyway, and then we're going to kind of echo that back out to the table. So what that's really going to do for us is just going to get away from this error about a non-well-formed numeric value encountered. And that's just kind of, it's a warning, it's a notice. It might not show up depending on your Apache distribution, like if you're using production settings with debug mode off. You might not see these in real production. XAMPP actually has a lot of debug options turned on, so it being a notice means that it probably would not show up in a production environment. Anyways, now that we have officially said we want to do this kind of conversion, those error messages are going to disappear, and we're just kind of stuck with our normal data here. It's pretty neat. We can also kind of create a sort of an overall bill character. So if we wanted to say what's the overall cost of going to the store today, we could create a variable bill and start it at 0, because that's, we might not spend anything, I guess. And then after we've created the total for each thing that we want to buy, we just need to take the bill and plus equals the total to that. This is kind of a shortcut method here. We're kind of combining these two arithmetic operators together. This would be also equivalent to doing bill is equal to total, or bill plus total. That would be kind of the equivalent to that. But the plus equals shortens it up a little bit, because we're just going to take the variable that's there and we're going to add a new value to it, and then make it the same variable again. So bill plus equals total. Bill is going to be equal to bill plus total. It's kind of the same shortcutting method there. And somewhere down here at the bottom, we'll echo out some sort of small h4 tag with bill enabled inside of it, so we can see how much we're going to spend when we go to the store today. That's our total. So $400.05, assuming the math is all coming through correctly. Now, when I made my shopping list, I was kind of imagining myself being, 1,000 years in the future. So, not a lot of these items probably exist in today's world. So you might want to end up deleting those at some point, but the point is that we're going to try to create an add item page where we can add new items to this list. So the first part was getting the list to print off of the data set, similar to what we did last week. Hopefully that didn't take too long. And then we'll transition over to the add item page, and we'll try to add more text, more data into the data set. So in the folder where we have all of our files, Stein's Lab 4, let's open up the additem.php file. And we can go ahead and just add the top bit here that did exist before to start the template at the top and start this template at the bottom. Now, you might be thinking it'd be really nice if he gave us that to start with, but I'll explain why I didn't include it as we get closer to the end. So that should get us kind of where we'll be able to go back and forth a little bit better between the two as we get started. And that gets us there. What we're going to want to do here is first we want to send new data up to the server. The first thing that we're going to need to do is create us a form tag. That way there's actually something in the page that we can type out and put some things in. So I'm not going to go too deep into how you could use your framework to make your form look super awesome and great. I'm just going to kind of stick with what we need to, just a basic kind of form tag. That way we can get the basics that we need to get started. So form tag is where most of the server interaction is going to occur. By default, it's got no look or feel to it. There's nothing really there. What we're going to do is inside of it, we're going to define some input tags that are going to allow us to take data from the user. So let's start off by just putting in one for product real quick and talk about that. So I'm going to put the text of product, and then this is our input tag, input type equals text. It is going to make it a text box. We're going to give it an identifier, ID equals product, because that's what we want to buy. And then we also have to include a name attribute to it too, and I'm going to call it product as well. Typically you see these two named the same, and the reason is in JavaScript and CSS, product is going to be how you can change that name in the CSS and then the JavaScript. This name attribute though, this is what is going to be dealing with data to the server. So by default, it's not going to look too fancy. Just kind of a box here. We can click inside of it and type some things. That's kind of cool. What we kind of notice here though is product. If we kind of click on product, nothing really occurs here, and that's because we just made it some plain text. Going back to ID being sort of used on the client side, really what we should use here is a label tag and give it a for attribute that's going to match the input tag that we want to use it on. So we named this ID equals product. This for attribute is going to be equal to that, and then we'll put whatever text that we want to show up in the middle inside of it. Now what this is going to do for us is that we can still click in the box and type things, but also we can click on the label now and bring focus to the box. It kind of seems like some extra work for not a lot of payoff, but going to handicap accessibility concerns is that this is just kind of an empty box. The handicap accessibility software isn't going to know that, or your variable names or your IDs are not necessarily going to give any intrinsic value to what this input box is for. And even though we did have some text that was near it before, that association can get confusing, especially for those that are blind and using assistive devices. So it can be kind of hard to determine what a box is for without using the label tag. So it's always really good practice to include it for any time that you're creating a form tag and creating any kind of inputs for users to interact with. Let's put a break tag here so we can just kind of separate down a line a little bit, and we'll go ahead and throw in a button tag, button type equals button. We can also kind of give it a name or an ID. We're going to give it a name this time for button go, and the text will say submit, and we'll close off the button. So now we should have kind of our field, our label, our box, our button. And we click the button. Type equals button is a generic button with it nothing occurs. Let's do type equals submit. That'll work a little bit better. It's actually going to look the same. Type equals submit. It'll look the same. But before I was clicking on it and getting mad because nothing worked. But this time, if I click on the button, we can kind of see up here at the top, ooh, something occurred when we clicked the button that time. Here's some sort of product. If we maybe did that again, we typed in some randomness, and looky there, our text from our box showed up inside of our query string. By default, the form tag is going to use what's called a GET request to send values up to the URL string. Now, we kind of dealt with a little bit of that last week when we used the request object to get values out of the query string for sorting out the elements. And if we wanted to be a little bit more official about that, we could put on the form tag method equals get. And that would kind of have the same effect of doing that. So if we kind of click on home here, or it's kind of why I'm switching back and forth. We go here and make sure we clear out the query string and stuff. So this will act the same way. Method equals get, things go up to the top of the page. Now the other way, or one of the other ways, is also the method equals post. And the difference here is that when we kind of go, instead of when we type here, we hit go, it may seem like nothing occurred. The URL string up here is not here. What occurred though is that in the inspector window here, if we go to network, and we'll do this one more time. I think we gotta have this open. Yeah, let's have that open. We might have to close some things down and get a better view here. There we go. Network tab, add item. If we scroll down through the text, there's our text. So let's try that again with, we'll change the text here. So this is, we'll type in product to Darth Vader. Network tab, add item. Under the header section, now we're passing in data here, product Darth Vader. One of the benefits to doing that is that when it's down here in the form data section, if we're using SSL port 443 on our computer, then this data is going to be encrypted between us and a website. So if I were to put in my social security number, the way it stands right now, technically it's being done not securely because we are not under 443. So that means anybody, if we posted this data out to a real server containing our social security number, someone could sniff this header information from that page and determine where that value was at. Even in the query string, it's especially easy to see because even with encryption, that query string can be seen when it's traveling on the network because that's going to be part of the request URL that's in the general section. It's really only down here in the form data section and some of the other request headers where you might see some SSL encryption occurring if it's turned on, currently not turned on. It's just something to keep in mind. If you're using any sort of form data, it can be captured if it's unsecured. If you're really concerned that the data in transit means something and you don't want someone to find it, then you have to use SSL, and you also have to use post, because even under secure socket layer, SSL, you will still get the query strings captured during transit. It's only during a post where that stuff is kind of secured underneath our SSL. Anyway, that's probably enough about security. We'll have a lab in a couple weeks that talks a little bit deeper about security. So let's keep just working through our form real quick and trying to get it going. So we posted to the page, we got the button, we know the data is kind of coming through there. Let's go ahead and just kind of create our next fields. That way we'll have a little bit of a form to work with, and most of them are going to be the same. So we'll create a label for price, and price, label, input type equals text, ID equals price, name equals label, or name equals price, sorry. Break tag, label for equals quantity, and I really debated on giving you this code out of the box, but since it is kind of so similar, and it's going to be good for practice for you to really kind of type it out yourself. A large part of being a good developer is just being able to kind of type pretty quick, and you're probably hearing my keyboard go crazy as I sort of type that out. Don't get discouraged though, it took me a long time to really kind of type that out, to learn how to type stuff up pretty quick like that. Anyways, getting down through the reason why I just glossed over those, because they're just all text boxes, the same as we were doing before. So if we go and just hit refresh, we're going to see that we're pretty much the same. I did include a select tag though, because select tag is a little bit more of a deeper structure. What this is going to create for us is a drop-down list, and in the drop-down list there'll be several options, kind of like where we are trying to find our items in this list. So we'll have a select tag that defines the beginning of the drop-down list, and then we'll have some option tags that will allow us to choose which one we want to choose. So first one I'm actually going to put in here is having a blank value and then saying to select one. So that'll be kind of the first one that we have there, and that's pretty common that you see when drop-down boxes are being used. Is that the first thing is always kind of like a default state, and you have to select some other state that you want to use. We can kind of define those as we need, and we don't really have to change the value tag here. We had to do something. We had to add value here to blank because technically this option had no value. But the other options here we can kind of glean from here, so hardware, beauty, and food, or we could add more if we wanted to. We'll just go with those ones that are currently in the file: hardware, beauty, and food. And there we go. So now we should have 3 options in our list, and we could kind of select one, and press our buttons, type in some things, click our submit, and then see down here, here's our form data. We got sort of all of our things coming in through, except the select tag here we need to add. Sorry, name equals location, because we seem to have forgotten that one. We got product, price, and quantity, but no location. So we'll save our file and just hit refresh this time. We'll resend the last post. You got to be a little bit careful with whether or not you hit refresh. Refresh just did the last page, or whether you just did that. So if we go back into the page, now we got location as part of our form data set. I didn't type anything in that time, so they were all blank. But yeah, if we did, they would all show there. Alright, so we're not really interested in kind of looking at the form data in the browser. We're more interested at this point in trying to display it or do something with it on the server. So the first thing that we'll probably want to do is, and we can do this right up inside the form tag kind of at the top, is that we're probably going to want to do a little bit of at least basic validation. to ensure that we typed in some values here, because if we just kind of hit and submit, you know, we need to figure out what's going on here. So we'll add a PHP block up here, and we'll just start with echo hello world and an h4 tag. That way we can see it pretty easily. There we go. So there it is. This could be a good place for, changing this to an error message or success message at some point. Your record has been successfully submitted, or there are errors, or please continue. The problem now is that it's always going to show up. It shows up each and every time. So let's figure out how we can make it only show up after data has been submitted, because it's kind of showing up whether we hit the button or we go to the page fresh. It's always there. So we kind of at least need to know when form data is present or when form data is not present. And we can do that through the name equals button go parameter that's here. So even though that we don't have a value specified for this button, the fact that it exists and it's coming in with the form data can make a good check for us to figure out what we want to do with it. Now, an if statement in PHP will allow us to make a decision based on some condition. The condition is inside the parentheses. What we want to do, if it's true, is inside the first set of code blocks. So what we want to do, what we want to check here is to see if some value is set. The isSet function in PHP will return true or false based on whether or not something exists, whether it's been set or not. And that's a good check for our form variables down here, especially button go, because if we come to the page normal, did I save it? Yeah, I'm going to at least make it line 9. If is set, let's just comment this out. Because I think one of the things we did not check was that if we come straight to the page from the link and look at the network, there is no form data set. Yeah, that's kind of that is not set. So let's take these back out. If is set underscore $post, what we want to check is button go. We want to see if button go exists in the set of post variables. So I got to be a little bit careful here. So post, that's our variable to check. I'm going to check if it's is set. Hello world. Oh, we need to move our echo hello world statement inside of here. Because we only want to echo this if it exists. So it shouldn't show up here when we're kind of just coming to the page normal. Or if we click the button, then it will show up. So that post variable was set. This thing was existing. It was set. That returned true. And we are basically saying, if true, do this. Or else do that. Else, error in your code. Echo, there was an error. And we can still kind of put it in an h4 tag or whatever, just so it's kind of easy to see. Or maybe just a paragraph. So, kind of an error. If we come to it normal, we click OK, we go hello world. Kind of make a decision on that post variable. We're not really interested in the else part of that. We just kind of want to go if the post variable is good. That's going to be mostly where we want to do our, our study. So we know that we're only going to be here if we're getting data out of the server at this point. And we should be able to access the values of that data through the post variable like we did before. So we'll just need to kind of create some variables here to probably make our lives a little bit easier. So that way we don't have to write all these extra characters. And through the post, is where we'll get, product, and through post or another one, and we'll just, I don't know if I'm making it easier by doing this or not. So product, price, price. I'm just kind of shortening up the variable names here. Quantity, 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 location, location. Not sure I saved any keystrokes that time. We can try to print that out, or print out some sort of string to help us just show that we did do something here. So some sort of paragraph tag, and we'll say quantity times product at some price, at symbol. Can't seem to find my at symbol. We'll forward escape a $sign here, so it's easier to see kind of what that happens. If we didn't do that, we might run into some strangeness. So quantity recorded. Yep. So let's reload the page. Gobbledygook, 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 hardware, and go. Da 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 was recorded. Forgot my closing paragraph tag. Cool. So we're kind of passing our data back in through the server. We're taking it through the post. We're storing it in local variables. We're doing a print. What we want to do is try to determine if these values are empty or not. And this is just basic validation of a form. You should always really take a lot of time to validate the data that you're taking in from your clients. It doesn't matter if it's just an internal web app or something on the external web. Most of your hackers, most of your attackers are going to try to come through your web forms in some way or another. So it's always good to make sure that you're doing a lot there to make sure the data looks good, is valid, it translates okay, it's not quirky in any kind of way. You strip out any extra characters that maybe shouldn't be there or might cause strangeness in web forms. And again, we'll kind of cover some of that in the last lab of the course. Anyway, what we can do is we can kind of start with a blank variable here. So this variable is just blank. It has no, it's a string, but it has nothing in the string, kind of a blank string. And we can do some sort of basic checks here. If product, $product is equal to a blank string, which means that we didn't type anything into the box, we'll set this error message to be product can't be blank. Can't be blank. And throw a break tag on the end of it. Now, presumably, we would only show that we recorded a successful transaction if we knew there were no errors, or we would only perform deeper tasks only if we knew there were no errors. So if we presumed that the variable started as a blank string and then we went through and we tried to find an instance in which our form was not valid, like product being blank, if we come back to the end down here and error is still equal to a blank string, that means that we didn't find any mistakes in our form. If error does exist here, we did increase the value of error somehow because it met some condition. And really, that's kind of the else part of it, because it's either a blank string or it's not. It's kind of a true-false test there. So else, we'll throw out echo the paragraph tag with ER in it. And you could add a class in here, like your own CSS class for error. if you wanted to make it red or whatnot. Not really worried about that right now. Just the difference in text will be enough to show us. So add item, if we click submit on its own, product can't be blank. So we got the error message from here because product had a blank value in it. But if we type something in, then da 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 was recorded at da da da. Now we didn't check the other fields yet. They would all be pretty similar. And again, I'm not sure I'm saving myself any time by trying to do this. To check the other fields, if price is a blank string or product quantity is a blank string, or if location is a blank string, location, quantity, if I can spell correctly, price. So now we're kind of checking each. Check fields that data exists. That's kind of what those if statements are doing. So location can't be blank. Actually, we want to be adding to this string each time, so I need to add a period in here. Kind of one of the downfalls of copying and pasting. So let's try that one more time. Did I not put a label on location? I must not have. Sure didn't. Sorry, label for location, location. Okay, now if we type all the things, product, price, quantity, location, none of the four can be blank. We type in 1 or 2 and click go. Only the 2 that were empty now show up. And if we type all of them in, we'll get our error message. Remember that the first option in location actually has a value of blank. That's kind of why we added it. That way it too could have been validated. It's pretty neat. You could also type in HTML form validation. Now, form validation on the client happens on the web browser, so you can't really expect users to actually abide by it, because we do kind of opening up an endpoint that doesn't require a form in some ways. So this could be another way to do that sort of thing, to provide some client-side validation. We'll take those out for now, because we really should be doing it on the server, not on the client. Or at least both. Always on the server, and client doesn't hurt, basically. We're pretty close to the end of the lab. All we really need to do now is just sort of tie this data together. So technically the home page is still got the form that we worked out, the data from we worked out before. And we're starting to get some new data back to the server that we might be able to start using it a little bit. And we already got it kind of in variable format, so we could keep printing it and doing some other things. But let's also include it into our data file. So what we'll need to do here is we'll need to open up the data file a little bit differently than how we did it the first time. And we'll try to go in and add some more data to it so we can see kind of what's going on. So we'll define a variable called myFile, and we'll use a different PHP function this time to open it up before we're using the get contents. But this time we're going to use fopen. Fopen is going to take 2 parameters. The first one is going to be the file that we want to open, which is data.txt. That's our file. And the second one is going to be the mode that we open it up with, and we want to use what's called a plus. That way we can append the file and add to it. Now really the A is the part that does that. The plus sign there is it will create the file if it doesn't exist. So if you happen to delete your data.txt file for some reason, this command would actually recreate it for us. Otherwise, the A is going to append to the end of the file. There are other options for using fopen if you want to read deeper about that function and what it can do. We'll need to format a line for our data file, and I'm just going to call that data or line. Let's call it line. And what we're going to want to make that line look like is basically we want to add a new line and a new line character, sorry. Right now the pointer to the end of the file is at the last character at the last row. So first thing we'll need to do when we add a new record is to create a new line and then write that line of data into the file. And of course there's going to be we need to add in our separators between what our data is going to be. So I'm going to hit Control Z to take it back to its original. And here, line, so PHP underscore EOL. This is a constant in PHP that represents end of line. So if you ever kind of want to use end of line pretty ubiquitously across different systems, Unix, for example, uses just a /n, but Windows actually has a carriage return line feed, which is like a /r/n or something like that. So different operating systems have a little bit different idea of what end of line is. And the good thing about this PHP underscore EOL constant is that it will just know what system you're on and which one to use. It's kind of cool. Anyway, so we want to add that end of line statement. And then we want to build up the line of text for print into the CSV file. So product, our pipe character, location, and we want to make sure we do them all in the same order of the ones that are there. Price and quantity. Yep. So you could console that down on the log if you wanted to get a closer view of what that line looks like. But we should be able to just write that file in. We can use the fwrite command in PHP. Again, kind of a cool command. It's going to take two parameters here. The first one is going to be the file that we want to write to, and the second one is the string that we want to write. So the first one is my file, and the second one is the line of text that we want to write to that file. After we've written the line, we want to close the file out. So fclose, close my file. It's always good practice that whenever you open a file, you want to close a file. If you don't ever close the file and the program never terminates, or maybe even if the program does terminate, the file might not actually be released by the operating system. So you could get into some sort of weird state where you can't open or edit the file because it's in use, because it's being used by a process, and maybe that process has been orphaned and just kind of running way underneath the hood somewhere. So typically I always kind of think of whenever I open a connection, anytime I open a file, open a connection, open a thing, I should always be trying to find some sort of close. How do I close that file? How do I close that resource? How do I close that driver? How do I close that thing? Anytime you open, you should always be thinking about a close. Anyway, if that works out well, we should have written our file, and closed it out, and we're still successful. So this statement's still going to apply, and everything should sort of work now. So we're kind of going with Futurama themed items here. Maybe we want to buy our Planet Express ship and see if this works. I would suggest using real numbers at this point. And we'll call that a hardware item object and submit. 2 Planet Express ships at $22 recorded. So let's go back and look at our home. And there is our Planet Express ship for $22. We wanted 2 of them and $44 total. Kind of cool, huh? Going back, like I said, we're almost closed. If you go back to Notepad++, it detected a change, so it's going to want you to reload the file, and you can see our new record was created there. And you really should be able to go to town at this point, kind of creating your own shopping list. It might be kind of a pain to jump back and forth, and the reason why, a lot of times you do some things in development and then do other things later that are based on it. So an add item, I didn't really give you these things even though I could have. I'm going to take them back out because really we're just going to say add item. All this page that exists is really just the form tag itself and then how the form tag gets changed to the data. If we go back to index.php and kind of think about where in the PHP does things start loading and where would we want to show our form, this is where we load up the file. So if we do kind of any sort of writing or action to the file beforehand, we can do it up here, add item.php. We'll use our include statement similar to our header statement. What's cool is it's going to pull in the actions for both. So now when we go to the home page, we're actually going to have our form up at the top with our button and everything kind of there, and we'll have our ability to check for validation, and it won't print and load new records unless they're valid. And if we want to add, a new robot, maybe we want to buy I can't think of it. It's the one where Bender turns into a wooden robot. We'll just buy some Slurm. How about that? We want to buy Slurms, and we're going to buy a bunch of them because we want that bottle cap, and that's going to be a food. So we'll hit submit and look down, and there's our Slurm food, $2, and that'd be a lot of money for some Slurm. So anyway, that's kind of the point of the lab. Is a lot of work, I know, to kind of get to this point. It's probably a really long video. But I think it really shows the client, the server, the passing of the data, the print of the data, the save to the file, and kind of builds on things that we did last week too. So I'm hoping that hope everybody does pretty well with this lab. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or ask. Have a good one. Bye.